Very first thing on the agenda is having new people on the call sort of introduce themselves. And so I see a few new names there. So if we could start from the top, I think that would be Kat Thornton. I think you would be number one on the list.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kat. I'm an information scientist. My day job is I work at Yale University Library, but my reason for joining the call today is outside of work. I'm working in partnership with Mika, who's also on the call and will introduce in a minute. I'm the information scientist supporting Mika's work, and what we're doing is building a global food composition database of databases, and we're building that in Wikibase, which is the software that enables Wikidata. Thanks for letting me join your call. I'm happy to be here and to learn with all of you.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And with that, we might as well have Mika introduce as well.
Yeah, thanks. So as Kat mentioned, Kat and I have been working on this wiki food composition database for over the past year now. I am an assistant professor in the Department of International Health in the Division of Human Nutrition at Johns Hopkins University. I do nutritional epidemiology work in my research, and food composition databases are a big part of my research. And so I'm very excited to be here to learn from all of you.
Great. Indeed, food composition is something we run into every week in terms of food on with respect to the USDA work we're doing. So it's great to have folks who are probably more involved in the in-foods world and the Eurofur world of food composition databases to see how we can coordinate all that stuff. Okay. I also see new to the call, Lota.
Yeah, that's me. Okay, so sorry for possible background noises, first of all. So yeah, my name is Lotta Kuuliala, and I'm from Ghent University, Belgium. And I'm working at the research group of food microbiology. So let's say quite practical things in many ways. But what I'm doing is that I'm developing data-driven methods to assess food quality and to characterize food quality. So I'm also interested in food quality as a concept, and especially on the different dimensions that food quality offers, because there's, after all, objective versus subjective dimensions, status versus phenomenon. So in order to get, let's say, get this formalized and get structure into this these complex interactions within there, that's the reason why I'm here. Basically.
Okay.
So nice to meet you all.
Great. Really interested to learn more about your work too. Indeed, we've mulled over simple things like raw versus fresh and what's packed in such language. So, okay, great. Next up, I think Lucia.
Hi, you can see me now. Hi, I'm Lucia. I'm currently in the UK, and I thank you very much for letting me join the call. I work in a project that is called MAPS, and it's a very big project, and we are building a tool, so a website where a policymaker or researcher could go there and do estimate of micronutrient deficiency in few clicks. So to do that, we need to put a lot of data set in that tool, and I'm basically in charge of, well, not in charge, but I'm curating most of the food composition table for Sub-Saharan Africa, and also we are also curating food balance sheet and other dietary assessment survey data. So I don't have any knowledge on ontology, but I think it would be very useful to integrate that in the tool. And also recently I started my PhD, and I would like to add granularity to good composition tables and use more especially refined data. Instead of using, for example, one value for one country, they'll be able to use multiple values for different regions or locations.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so your needs match the needs of others who are looking for a finer granularity of all of this nutritional content information, which so far through USDA, SR Legacy, and so on have just been represented as averages of food items taken from samples all across entire countries. And of course, that's no good in this modern day of nutritional epidemiology and research. So our goals are shared in that respect, right? Okay, so now let me just check. Anybody else? No, I believe that's it for new folks. So just for the new folks, just to say this is a meeting of different ontology projects with more and less experienced ontologists. Foodon is a bit of a glue. I like to think of it as a little bit of a glue between these different ones. And so when we come to Foodon, we're coming to discuss some of the patterns that more of these different ontologies need. But we don't mean to be at all the core of the discussion. We welcome presentations from all the different groups on what their needs are and what they're doing with ontology. And I've so far been chairing these, but we'll probably switch to a shared chair kind of model for those who are active on the ontology front. Okay, so moving on to the agenda this morning. I'll screen share. And here we are. Okay, so got the new introductions down. We mentioned doing the integrated food ontology workshop in Bolzano this fall. So that has been, the committee has met once for this, and we're going to have a 2-day slot of 4 hours each, and we'll take the topical areas that we did last year in a very successful workshop seminar format, and we're going to put them in this year as well. But this time around, we're also going to accept more full paper length review for presentation in our own 2-day, half-day workshop. But those full-length papers, if we review them and accept them, they can also go into the main conference publications. Now, there's this relationship between ICPO, the International Conference of Biomedical Ontologies, and these other little conferences that are within it. And you'll see that on that ICPO link that I included at the top. So we're one of the workshops that operates underneath that umbrella. That the overall ICPO conference will take talks directly. And so if you want to actually present a talk in that main conference, then you have to submit a paper, not a paper. Yes, you have to submit a paper directly to them for a conference talk slot. But we're going to support the same thing that we did last year, which is more informal talks, which means just a shorter abstract that you can send to IFO if you want. And you don't necessarily need to be involved in the conference publications for IFO. Okay. Any other questions about that? Oh, I'll be sending out a call for paper like as soon as I get any last feedback from the conference organizing committee that we've struck. So probably tomorrow or the next day, I'll send out a call for paper, and expecting that you guys can distribute this to your own lists as well if you want. we had about 20 papers last year, but that was partly, I think, because it was shooting for a more conversational level. I'm not sure how many we'll get this year on these 4 topics, but with 2 half-day slots, we'll be very busy. Okay, so Food On News. We have hired a programmer, which we've needed for the last number of months in order to get the LexMapper service going. And so just to explain, LexMapper is a tool we developed for matching free text descriptions to ontology terms within the OboFoundry family, and specifically ones related to food sampling. So Food On, Ubron, NCBI taxon, and some Envo packages of terms in there to pick apart and categorize descriptions of food items. I just wanted to mention, for those of you who may not know, the Zuma software service that Embl EDI offers in Europe. They do a very similar thing in matching free text to specific ontology sources that you can select. And I think for our purposes, that's the most interesting conversion. And so if you have a long list of taxa, they will map over and give you an ontology ID, and similarly for other kinds of terms. Okay, just thought I'd mention that for the record. Other Food On News, so organismal materials, which Anusha presented on, I think 2 months ago, is moving along well. We have about 536 pretty much finalized terms, and they are now sitting in an OWL file in the development branch of Food On. And they represent the next level that Anusha was talking about in terms of naming the anatomical part times the scientific name as a food, as a basic commodity or raw ingredient kind of food. In fact, these aren't raw necessarily. Anytime you reference any one of these terms, they could be in a cooked form or a raw form. So we'll have a separate tab that precomposes terms that covers whether they're raw or not, for example. Okay, so you're all free to comment and review or even add terms on the bottom that you see are not in Food On. We're sort of first identifying in this pass all the terms that are already in Food On that need this better granularity of support description. And as well, some new terms are coming in for genome tracker requested terms for their surveillance of pathogens in food. Okay, that's that item. Food process ontology hierarchy, I just thought I'd mention it briefly. We haven't done a whole lot of work in the last month on that, but this draw IO diagram does show some of the tweakings and nudgings that we've been adding to this. So always welcome to have feedback on this. One of the things that I was to do and haven't quite done yet is create a little models of what some of the other ontologies have going in this space. So the Po2 process model, I'll add a little model of that showing how it relates to this diagram and these processes, which are kind of explained within the OboFoundry process, would be process model terminology. This is a draw IO diagram, so it means that anybody can view it online with the free open source link, diagrams.net. That covers Food On News specifically. So before we move into issues, are there any other topics of discussion people would like to talk about?
Hi, Damien. This is just Bree. I had a question on Food On. So this might be very basic and probably very naive question. I was, as you're aware, we're working on developing a system for looking at commercial ingredients, and and I would like to use the terms, similar to what's in Foodon, so they can be linked at certain point.
Mhm.
And I was trying to download the file. It says there's an option for a .csv file, but when I download it, it comes up, the characters that come up are not understandable.
Okay, let's check that out. So all of Foodon is available on GitHub, and if I'm not mistaken, you're probably thinking of maybe a Foodon labels file that you might have been downloading.
I'm not fully familiar with the terminologies, but I'm like, for example, looking at multi-component foods like pasta.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to see what kind of terms you had for pasta.
Right. So I'm just guessing at which file you might have been trying to download in order to see it. So Foodon labels was an example of a query that ran a number of years ago that would match a Foodon term to a title of a food product. So I was thinking maybe you were using that file. Were you consulting the GitHub website?
No, I was on Foodon itself, and no, I was also looking through a search. I believe it was it had the option of doing it as a OWL file or as a .csv file.
Mm-hmm.
And I was opening the .csv file thinking I could open it through Excel, but
okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's work through that offline. I need to know where you were getting those files from in order to figure out what's going on there, whether it was straight from the Foodon GitHub site or not.
I'll put it in the chat. I have that. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just. Now the thing is, I don't get to see. Do I even get to see the chat?
Well, give me a minute.
Okay.
Oh, you can see the chat?
I haven't figured out how to share my screen and see the. Oh, there we go. Okay. Maybe I'm getting to see chat. Okay, now it's broken chat off separately. Okay, good. All right, so. Right, OLS. Okay, OLS. Good place to see it. Right, so then they have a download link.
Yeah, but that is.
It comes in as an OWL file there. Maybe you were looking at a particular term and getting a.
Well, let's say pasta, for example.
Right, okay, so let's try pasta.
So it shows up. Now, for .owl file, what app should I be using to see it? Okay, or to have it in, I need to put this in an Excel spreadsheet.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. So the best way to get every term in its definition or its label, and maybe even its synonyms, if those are useful for the lookup, is to run a query and get those back from OWL using one of two tools. And so there's a little bit of an explanation on the Foodon website. reusing and getting the content.
Okay.
And so it's under reuse technical.
Okay.
And one section of it talks about using Sparkle to get, let's see, to get the contents. Right. I'm just quickly looking to see if any of these examples is pertinent to what you have, what you need. So these queries are a little bit more complex. They're getting counts of term categories. I think I should add a little example here of how to just query for all the labels and synonyms of food products in Foodon, and I can put that in here for you to provide an easy like 1 or 2 line command to get what you want.
That would be awesome.
Okay. Now, Matthew, you've just
Everyone's time.
Yeah, I just regarding this matter, you've got on here reuse technical, and down below you said using robot. I think maybe it would be helpful if there was a section that said something like getting terms into CSV, because for people who come to this without knowing robot or Sparkle or Protege, they don't know what they need to know.
Yes.
They just know that they want to get it into a spreadsheet or comma separated files.
Yes, I believe.
Is that fair to say, Jaspreet, from your perspective?
Yes, exactly.
So maybe, while I appreciate
You got it.
File or OWL. I don't even know the terminology that you use.
You
right.
Yep, and that's loud and clear. So I will add that right at the top. The most accessible section, hopefully, is the first one that one should meet on this page. Okay, thanks, folks. I appreciate that. Yeah, me too. Okay, so back to, right. So I'll just make a little note here, add section. But just to say, Jaspreet, you might want to try, if you have a list of existing terms that you need to match to, you could try that Zuma tool as well. I'd be interested to know if it kind of does what you want, but we can talk about that on the side.
Okay.
I wonder whether that might actually be an interesting little group that helps to develop quick and easy little utilities for getting CSV in and out of Foodon, most specifically out, because not everybody's a curator.
Yeah. So there's I would say you're either doing a Sparkle query, and it's just another offering that we can have as a ready-made file. That's actually where that file on Foodon.
Sparkle is not even a term that I would know.
Right. So what I'm getting at, let's see if I have the GitHub site here somewhere for Foodon. Let's see. Foodon. So in the root of the directory, of course, there's this Foodon OWL, and it has the OWL version of things. But over in the source folder, we had been offering once in a while generated this Foodon labels TSV, which is the label of every food product in Foodon. So what we could do is create a regular version of the TSV file and put it up to the top here as well, so that you even don't have to run any queries or anything on the reuse technical. You just hit this file of the TSV representation, and and you're ready to go. I think that would be an attractive thing.
Maybe can I make a suggestion that we actually have a if you end up in one of these weeks where you don't have someone who wants to present their OWL or their ontology or their project or whatever they're working on, that we maybe have a little teach-in for the technical side of things that's very light about how to elicit a Sparkle query against food on and create I would say, two things, a CSV of interest or JSON file of interest, because I think that those are going to be the two most useful things, not just for researchers for the CSV file, and then for application developers for the JSON file.
Yeah.
If they want to have food on in the back end.
Right. So it's that. So the idea of we can a TSV file that hopefully meets most people's needs, but to offer a little workshop in ways of getting a more customized output as versions come forward. Yep, sounds good. Okay, I'll add that to the
work with you on that.
Right. Because I know there's so many different users coming on board now.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and it's about widening the tent, right? I mean,
yeah,
really.
it's pitching the tech to different levels of expertise and need.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Add section to reuse technical. Add decompose file. And workshop. Okay. All right. So moving to the next section then, if there are any other questions or comments first. Okay, so for the folks who are just on the call, new, we have this monthly call in which we discuss different related food ontology stuff and integration. As well, every 2 weeks there's a food ontology, food on specific curation call. And then once a month as well, there's a food process ontology call. So when we talk about issues within the context of the joint food ontology workgroup, what we're talking about is the GitHub site for the joint food ontology, so workgroup. So under food ontology at GitHub, there's this food on, which is food on itself, and then the joint food ontology workgroup. So this is the one that has official involvement by different ontologies. And here we've got the issues page. And these are generally issues that involve one ontology asking a request of another. So Jessica Singer, who's been working on the hops ontology for beer hops, has a general question about how ingredients are handled in the different ways that they could be. And so that's the most recent request, and we haven't discussed it yet. So let's open the floor a bit. I have read through this and had some comments, and then others have pitched in possible more technical details about how maybe to represent these. But just starting at the top, I don't know, Jessica, are you on the call right now? Doesn't.
Yep, I'm here. Rob is running a little bit late, but
Okay.
he should be coming fairly soon.
Okay, maybe you'd like to start the conversation by talking about the context of what you're needing to achieve.
Yeah, so when dealing with recipes, so there's what's in the recipe. So you have your main ingredients, which is like apple flour for an apple pie, eggs, sugar, things like that. And then there's the process involved. So first you have to beat the eggs and, you know, usually add wet ingredients, then dry ingredients, things like that. So there's a sequence as well on how, like what to do and how to add them. And then there's also the planning requirement. So like how many apples do you need to make an apple pie? Or like what's the like what's the minimum amount needed like in a list of ingredients. So yeah, and how much ingredients will you need? And then there's the nutrition part of it. So you start off with each ingredient has its own nutritional value, but then there could be a transformation process that changes the entire nutritional content of the end product, which is the apple pie. So apple pie is going to have a very different nutritional content than the apple it's derived from. And for us, we're mostly focused on in that list 1 and 3. But as a side note, like the parts of 2 and 4 are extremely useful for things like allergies and being able to show proper labeling so that people can be aware of things to avoid if they're allergic. But we're right now focused on the traceability part of it. So 1 and 3 is what we're mostly focused on. And yeah, so that's something that we're working through and having a little bit of trouble with.
Right. And so obviously in the database world, there've been quite a number of efforts to create ingredient sort of software for databases for describing ingredients and their proportions, and then maybe more complicated software for also talking about recipes, recipe planning requirements, as you say. It's sort of an opportunity to reinvent or re-examine all of this within the perspective of ontology. And that I open the floor to everyone else to talk about, but from my own perspective, that involves this idea of process ontology when it comes to not just the ingredients, but how to put them together. And that is under something to be developed. And so we do have a different, we do have another issue open, which I referred to over in the recipe model, to try to look at that, what it will take to have pieces there. But first, other people. Yes.
I'd like to jump in here because I've just had some wonderful discussions with the people over at Value Flows Ontology and the Data Food Consortium. And they even have an example, believe it or not, of traceability and processes for apple pie. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. We had our first conversation just the other day. I'm happy to bring them into this discussion. Here's the PDF to their. It's how they describe their ontology, the Value Flows ontology. It's really quite interesting. So from a first look with the people, and not at Value Flows, but at the Data Food Consortium, there's significant synergy between what Foodon's developed and what these two ontologies intend to do, which is to model the value chains as well as the product moving through the value chains. So I think that this is going to be something really, really amazing. And so Robert and Jessica, I'm happy to, I know that this is your chief area of concern, happy to make introductions to these guys. We have a standing meeting on Mondays, and if you wanted to explore that as a potential way to enhance and supplement what is happening in Foodon. And I hope you don't mind, Damien, that it's outside of Foodon.
Yeah, of course. this is a environment. This is a biological environment of evolution of the vocabularies, and so
Right.
And this particular group is all about the integration of them all. So, yeah, that's great.
One concern. Well, actually, Matthew, if I can take you up on that offer, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, from my perspective, one of the things that has been the most aggravating and or confusing is that we have not documented well a way of how either an exemplar or a way of measuring something within a process at a specific point. And to my knowledge, in the ontology world, there's only two ways. One is what schema.org is doing, and that derives more or less from the good relations ontology way back when. The other one is the SOSA ontology, which is fairly hardcore in science. But the primary problem that I think needs to be fixed or resolved is to say, this is this ingredient with this specific quantity, because that's the problem that reoccurs pretty much everywhere in these ontologies and in these processes.
Mhm.
And that may be like 1 gram of sugar.
Yep, I understand that, and so there are parts of that that sound simple, but yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it's
Yeah, I was also just, I'm not 100% clear on Jessica's issues, because if you look at the ingredients, what you make at home would probably be flour, apple, sugar. But if you look at a apple pie, which is sold, is going to have things like maltodextrin, modified starch, and all. So what is the interest? What are we referring to here when we're talking about ingredients? And then also wanted to point out there is a database in which the USDA database, which kind of links foods to possible ingredients.
Ooh.
You're talking about the food composition database?
No, as part of a database, a food and nutrient database for dietary studies, which is used for NHANES, there is a file which, for apple pie, it will have it will have what ingredients would go into an apple pie, and the reasoning, the rationale for this file is to provide some transparency as to how the nutrients were calculated. So it's called it used to be called FNDDS SR link file, at least a couple of years ago.
Would you mind putting a link to that in the chat or send out to the group?
Sure, I'll do that right now.
To answer your question, the issue is always that the problem that I'm mentioning is the one that recurs everywhere, in that you were saying, okay, it's a recipe for apple pie. Now, a lot of chefs will just throw ingredients in some random proportion and make an apple pie out of it. Hardcore food scientists in a plant will have a very specific recipe with specific amounts at certain point within this recipe. And finally, there's ingredients as we listed on the side of the container. But all of this is related information. The real issue I'm asking here is to say, at this particular step in this recipe, I am inserting 1 gram of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a measurement of something that fits within another ontological structure. So you're quite right. There are a number of locations where we can find references to what the thing is, but how do we measure it within the process is what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
Because then if we can actually standardize that, it gives us a anchor point to which we can generate, say, the ingredients list on the side of the apple pie box from the actual process. Furthermore, it lets us make statements about allergies and non-allergies on the side of the box, also based on an ingredients list. Am I addressing what you're asking?
I guess I'm a little confused because each, I mean, if you're talking about commercial apple pie, they're going to have different ingredients.
Right.
Yes.
Specific, which may be specific to each, each brand or each package.
Of course, but again, that's what we're trying to do here. And while the process may be individual, I'm gonna make this very, very simple and use an example from beer. I'm making a stout beers. I'm using 2 pounds of Cascade hops from this specific suppliers. So within my recipe at that point in time, 2 pounds of Cascade pellets are going into this vessel. And there's a piece of RDF that describes that. Now I know of 2 mechanisms to describe that, and I'm using both at the same time right now. Now, if you happen to have an allergy to that Cascade hops, then that's a marker we can instantiate later on. And from an ingredients on the side of the can perspective, it is Cascade hops, therefore I can derive that from it. That is the instance of that specific beer. Now, what I'm asking is, from an RDF perspective, how would you describe that?
So where I'm surveying this from the Obo Foundry land, and what I came across was Larissa Soldatova's exact 2 ontology of laboratory procedures. And what you find when you open that up is she's trying to say exactly what one adds and for how long and what kind of actions are performed on the material in the laboratory. And this seems to be, to me, an exact match to the needs in food science for a more specific process ontology that includes measures and materials involved in those processes. That's actually why she's in on the process ontology modeling group, and that's one of the directions I want to go in to see that process model can support recipes in particular. So I've dropped the link to the paper, and I think when you scroll down in that, you will see there she frames it within a little bit of the experiment, but the experimental action, whatever it is you're doing to stuff, has equipment involved, has temperatures, has actions according to protocols. And the examples that she has later on involve heat, incubation, mixing, all sorts of things like that. So on figure 3 is probably hitting it on the head about exactly what I'm expecting that we'll need out of the food science thing. So here, actually, I'll share that right now. I realize now I'm not sharing that browser window. Just a sec. Here we go. So it seems to me, whether we're looking at a petri dish of bacteria or a loaf of sourdough bread, we'll need to incubate it at X degrees for so many hours, and we need a unit ontology for that, a temporal aspect, and all of the other environmental controls and the actions. And so I'm expecting that we can merge her work into the process ontology or develop exact 2 out more to support this. Is this what you're looking for, Rob?
Okay, this is the direction I'm looking for. Honestly, I'd be very much happy if we had an RDF example here to
Right.
materialize this into something that we can actually reuse.
Right.
You know, it makes sense from a direction point of view. The devil's in the details.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I can say is that she did take her stuff as far as actually checking it out in terms of database operations in the laboratory. Where I've been hesitant to say a whole lot more, except what I did at the bottom of the thread, is the fact that OB has a units ontology, and I in fact added 2 units, all of the measures that I could find in cooking for tablespoons and teaspoons and that kind of stuff. But this units ontology isn't synchronized specifically with the other unit ontologies out there. And there are a couple of main ones, QUDT and OM from Wageningen University. So there's actually now another discussion group happening within Obo Foundry and talking to the Wageningen University folks about merging and creating a more unified units ontology. That's sort of saying, and that work is going on right now to demonstrate a new version, but I don't want to promise anything there just yet. It's not usable just yet. So at the moment, yeah.
No, go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
Well, just the units ontology is adequate as far as I can see right now. And I know that within the Obo Foundry perspective, it will have a clear and clean successor that will be easy to switch to. It will already have a one-to-one map into all the units. And it's going to a more international standard even than it is right now. SI-based standard, UCUM, I think it's called. So I have confidence about that particular aspect of it. And I'll just mention one last thing, which is the temporal thing within the Obo Foundry process model has always been a little bit of a pain in the neck. They had some ideas of time, but they didn't really have a simple, accessible way. So at the moment, you kind of have to invent simple things like process started at time t for a relation, process end at time t. They have process duration, but they don't have those other 2. So we have to kind of add those.
I realize this is an aside, Damien. I strongly recommend the time ontology, and that it allows you to make gratuitous statements like after and before without necessarily worrying too much about the mechanical details underlying it.
Yeah, there's plenty of things in food processing, plenty of examples where the actual duration is not time dependent, it's state dependent. So you stir something until it has a certain consistency. You bake something until it has a certain crust, a color. So there's those are aspects that I think are missing from what I've seen in the ontological world so far, but they're absolutely critical to actually making good food.
Well, I counter that a little bit. So if you look in RO, you'll see that the has part preceded by, succeeded by, those relations exist within RO, and they're meant to tie processes together. So you can have processes that encapsulate other processes that have dependencies. You can either choose to add that a process has a certain duration or not. And even if you don't have time information, you still have process dependency information. So when I talked about adding process has start, has end, I was trying to speak to that RDF vision you're talking about, Warren, where you actually need to know when you started incubating a particular loaf of bread or batch of bread or whatever, cheese. That has to show up in the RDF graph. So, but that aside, there's a process modeling level, which doesn't have to involve those details.
Just out of curiosity, Damien, then you're saying that that the relation ontology allows you to model something to say bake until golden brown?
The relationship
Until
model
crust is
says
golden brown?
that process A can continue until some condition that process B takes over on.
Okay.
So then it's up to us to add the phenotypes, the conditions. Yeah. So I'm really in favor of taking a general process model and then specializing it to the food domain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the example you put here gets at some aspects of the units question, although as Robert said, it'll be nice to see this sort of in a use case with actually instantiated data from the food side. But my question is, it still doesn't get at Jessica's issue that she posted, which is what happens when things change, and how do I know? Maybe some of the food composition people from USDA on here can chime in, but how do I know? We've batted this idea around before again, and it's not new. But what's the baking soda and whatever else interact in the acid-base combination in my baking mixture? Well, there is no more baking soda anymore. And so how do I know? That's not so taking the nutritional profiles of that is not accurate. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Jessica, are you trying here to develop a model where you could predetermine based on ingredients and processes what those nutritional profiles of processed foods might be?
Yeah, exactly. So being able to, like, when you get a look at the store, you'll get general values of things, but they're not taking into account individual ingredients being brought together. It's just, oh, we sampled a couple apple pies, so you're going to get roughly this nutritional content. But as we all know, there are different apples in the world. There are different nutritional values associated with those apples. So what is the variability on the nutritional content of this apple pie? Is it just an apple pie sampled everywhere, so everyone should have the same apple pie? But that's not true, right? So it's things like that where the ingredients have a big impact, and it causes a lot of variability in nutritional content. It's not all the same.
If I can make a comment, I think the value here is we have multiple different applications of this where we can reuse the same ontological structures. And if we can document which ones we're going to using to say this thing at this quantity, it's a win because we can reuse it in a half a dozen different locations.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And so I think part of this process will be about starting up the list of terms involved and coming up with a mutual agreement about how they should be defined. And we could start with the kinds of ingredients and what it means to be an ingredient, making sure that that's in an ontology. I volunteer food on, but there could be others. And the starting point. So, but one question is whether folks are willing to do this within the context of ontology and know that the IDs should then fall out to meet this RDF graph vision that you have, Warren, which isn't just a vision, it's a practical need over and over and over again.
So you'll forgive me. So I'm not, so like, again, there are certain things here we can argue about. And for example, how do you define time and whose units you use? And I'm not picky about that. Mm-hmm. What I'm really asking is, what are the basics can we put down that can fix that problem? Because even if you disagree with food on, if you know how Foodon represents things, then that gives you the integration points to actually talk to it.
Mhm.
I wonder if it might benefit this group, because as you say, Robert, there are, I think both of you are in agreement that there are a number of different use cases and perspectives that people come at this and uses. So perhaps what would be good is for us as a group, this group, in our heterogeneous perspectives that we come to Foodon and the variety of ontologies that are represented in this working group, to come and say, look, here are 3 or half a dozen use cases, and here's what we think are the best modeling practices for these types of use cases. So one could be a recipe / formulation use case. One could be a food composition of final ingredients use case, or final nutritional value and food composition of a processed food use case, right? So if we can think of those use cases and then define what are the components we need, I think that would actually go a long way towards then getting us to be able to model these things at a class level that would be useful for, because we can then identify, here's the components that cut across all the use cases, and here's the components that are unique to each specific use case. Does that seem like something that would be a good exercise for this group? Or am I kind of off in space?
I think that's pretty much what we did on the dietary terms. Ended up with kind of a matrix, and then out of that flowed more natural class hierarchies of different things. So I'd be happy to redo the process that you're talking about on ingredients and recipes in the same way that I think we successfully did it last year. So yeah, and that suggests to me creating a matrix that has the use cases around the edges and the terms, as you say, that they touch upon in a row and column.
Yeah, I'm thinking even before that we start with a user story, right? So thinking in terms of like agile development here. You go, you talk to your people who need some software, and you just ask them, give me your story of what it is you want to do. Just a single paragraph of here's what I want to be able to do, and start with those use cases, and then take whatever shorthand we need to put them into the type of matrix that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the people who come to this particular group are the ones who would be best to be able to provide those kinds of stories.
Yeah, definitely cross-disciplinary here. So
right,
from the composition database folks, the nutritionalists, and I don't know. I think, well, we have a chef on board when Tarini's here, at least one chef. So, okay. So I'm happy to do that. Start a document on that subject to kind of add to this. And I'll put that into the minutes so that we can contribute to those use cases. And hopefully, for example, the recipe model terms that are starting to be formulated here all end up falling in a nice little home in that. Okay, well, we're at 9:31. Anyone else have more comments about that?
This as well, just want to second the idea of having the use cases. I think it's a good idea, but we should also maybe come up with a format to how we want to capture the use cases. And I think chief to the exercises to make sure that we also capture some convergence. I mean, people will be working on their separate applications and use cases, but one of the bonus of having us all together is to make sure that we can discuss what are the convergence and what would be something that, like for example, the diet ontology that can sort of bring groups together. And related to that, I mean, I think the diet idea, sorry, the recipe idea is good, but I want to get a clarification on. It sounded to me that the wish is to have the ingredient and also the process being used. How do I say this? Being sort of combined into the same model in order to represent the recipe and also to this. But I'm wondering if the outcome there is to hope to be able to predict the transformation process and then therefore predict, for example, nutritional changes and so on. Or I'm just trying to get some clarification on what is the actual use of sort of bringing the information together. I think I'm still not very clear on that.
If I can address this, again, this is from our perspective. If you can speak to what you believe, if, let's take the apple pie mechanism to begin with. There's making a generic apple pie, then there's making the specific process that will happen within a plant. And those two should more or less match. But if we start recording the process with a specific apple pie, using this methodology, and that process no longer matches from an instance perspective, the ontological description of the generic process, that's an error and it needs to be reported. So we have the ability to match the instance of the process versus the generic process and see and have a check on the process.
I see. So
furthermore, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's like a quality assurance type of application there.
Yes. At the same time, if we know what the process looks like and what was in the process, it allows us to make declarations or statements about the process. So for example, you talked about the ingredient list on this box, which has a different set of rules than the ingredient list that goes into the process. And it may be that certain ingredients within that process are transformed within this as sugars in the final product. So that will affect the final ordering of that ingredient list on the box. So now we can have a secondary system that looks at how the process occurred and make a prediction of what that ranking on the packaging should be. And lastly, from an allergen perspective, there are an infinite list of allergens, not all of which are currently listed in industrial packaging. If you have the individual's allergy list, it allows you to build a system that says, these are my individual allergy lists or my individual dietary needs. How does it actually match with what went into this process and how it was processed? So it's always the same information, but used in a different context.
Great, thanks for the clarification. And let's say if we do have a model to capture the process and the ingredient and other information that will be useful for the application, is there a way to capture the and this might be sort of the traceability will come in. Is there a way to capture the process on the fly? In other words, if someone working in a bakery or factory made some mistakes, is the goal to capture that like to that sort of granularity and that level of sort of instantaneous capture of the information. And I'm just trying to sort of get a sense of where we're at and in terms of the granularity.
That's how Jessica and I make a living.
Great.
I think there's another aspect here, which is for me is the holy grail. which is, okay, you identify something that may be impacting somebody in a certain way. What, now, whether it's sugar or whether it's an allergen, I think allergens are sort of the low-hanging fruit here, but it warrants that this get modeled in a generic way, that it could be sugar, it could be carbs, it could be, so the question is what are the substitutions, either in ingredients or in processes, that I can make to achieve something with a similar outcome, but using different ingredients and processes that may be what I need. To me, that's the holy grail use case for food ontologies in general, is that question of substitution and how we do it.
Yep, and I'm really seeing the confluence of ontology and database work yielding results there. I was just trying to look up the immunotope on a database which is ontologically driven, and it's cross-referencing allergens and to taxa, to NCBI taxon, and that is the route I was looking at in terms of comprehensively annotating food related to allergens. The thing is, though, their database doesn't narrow it down to the specific anatomical part where the allergen chemicals, whatever you call them, are located. But that aside, I'm with you guys. I think all of the connections there. What I'm hoping is that it's worthwhile to do this within the context of the biomedical database stuff that is being ontologized. So that's a motivation for using a model that does mention NCBI taxon and so on. Okay, I think we've got work items cut out for us. I'll try to copy a number of these talking points as a lead-in to a use case document for that will be the prelude to creating a matrix where we can start to define the class terms. Well, thank you very much for this month's call, folks, in attendance and participation and really getting this work going. Really appreciate it.
Damien?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll sign off now and I'll stop this share.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, bye.
Hey, thanks, folks.